Hey, everybody. Joining me now is Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. Senator Paul, good morning.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. But what I want to talk about today is, as I'm sure you know, we've just seen the highest levels of inflation since 1990, 6.2% year over year price increases, according to the Consumer Price Index. What does this mean for Americans?
Well, I think inflation is pretty easy to explain, and people need to know what causes inflation. You get debt, then the Federal Reserve prints up new money to pay for the debt. That new money enters the circulation, and that expansion of the money supply, that is what is inflation. But it's also part of a bait and switch in the sense that people, big government politicians, offer you things they say are free child care, free health care, free college, free cell phones, free this, free that. But it's not really free. Either someone else is going to pay for it through higher taxes, or they're going to pay for it through borrowing and ultimately inflation. And it really is a bait and switch because often the same people that are being offered free stuff are also the ones who suffer most through the regressive tax that is inflation.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's regressive and hurts working people the most. Does it strike you as rich that so many of your colleagues in the Senate on the Democratic side promise not to raise taxes on the middle and working class, yet then they pursue inflationary policies?
Yeah, and it's why it's really important that we explain this to people. It's those on fixed income, retirees, also those of lower wages that are hit more from this. If you make $200,000 a year when your grocery prices go up, you just don't notice it as much as if you make $25,000 a year. So it definitely does hurt the very people. But this is the hard part about the messaging is that we have to explain to people that are being offered something concrete that is free, that we have to explain to them sort of the second order of thinking that goes to understanding that it's not free and that inflation comes from borrowing. And really, the inflation we have this year is probably the responsibility of both parties. Both parties, other than myself and a few others, were for all the spending of last year. So we borrowed $3 to $4 trillion last year, and we're set to borrow at least that much or more this year. So I think it is somewhat additive, but maybe even more exponential than additive. I think you may see inflation of 10 or 12% next year. Now, they're all saying the opposite. The Federal Reserve saying it's transitory. But I think the 6% that we've got now is based on last year's borrowing. And I think there's going to be significantly more borrowing this year. We've already spent an extra $2 trillion on a COVID bailout bill, which really didn't have much to do with COVID, but was more just a bailout bill. Another trillion on infrastructure. So we've already spent $3 trillion we don't normally spend, but we normally have $1 trillion of an institutional debt just based on our normal spending. So we're really up around 3 or 4 trillion for this year, probably. And we haven't even gotten to their big government socialist wish list of the next bill. So you can see how this could be an extraordinary amount of inflation coming on us.
Yeah, and it could be bad. But one reason that this is happening also is one that's been a little bit overlooked, and I want to get your thoughts on it. If you look at the graph from the Fred, right, you see the money supply in 2020. The graph just skyrockets upward because the Federal Reserve created digitally trillions of new dollars and injected them into the economy. How much of a role do you think the Fed has had in the current inflation problem, and is that being a little overlooked by some on the right?
Well, I think there's joint blame. Congress is initially to blame for spending money they don't have, but then the Federal Reserve says, "Oh, it's just our job to paper over this. It's our job to buy up that debt." And as they do, they create the increased money supply. So really, both Congress and the Fed are to blame, and they go hand in hand. If we ran a balanced budget, we wouldn't necessarily need a Federal Reserve. Basically, we have a Federal Reserve to pay for all that debt. And it works to a certain extent in the short run. Sort of John Maynard Keynes said, supply side economic or the Keynesian economics, the idea of stimulus works in the short run until people figure out, that there's more money out there and prices rise as a consequence. I think the other thing that's protected us over a several decade period is we export our inflation. We import more goods than we export. So there's a net outflow of dollars from our country. We buy more stuff than we sell. And so that money goes around the world, but it doesn't always come back immediately because other currencies and other countries are even more profligate spenders, profligate borrowers. What happens is there are dollars flowing in Africa. You might be in a small village in Mogadishu or something and exchanging dollars for goods over there. So those dollars don't come back to chase our goods. I do think, though, that you can have a precipitous decline. The question is, will we have gradual inflation, this gradual problem we can adjust to, or could you have a precipitous loss of confidence? And with a precipitous loss of confidence, you could see people fleeing, just fleeing the dollar. The reason it hasn't happened is the other currencies are just as bad. But I also think that people now have other choices. They always had gold and silver. You could buy the paper representation of that through stocks or mutual funds, but there was a certain illiquidity to that. But now people also are saying, well, gosh, I'd almost rather have a government fiat currency than a private fiat currency than a government when they're looking at cryptocurrency, because it's very exchangeable and somewhat private. So I do think people have other alternatives. You're seeing real estate being bid up extraordinarily. One of the people I read the other day was saying, well, who wouldn't buy and borrow? You can borrow money at 3%. You have real estate going up at 18%, what a deal. Well, it's a great deal until it isn't. So at some point, we're in this huge boom cycle. When does the correction come? Nobody knows. But when it comes, you don't want to be holding anything that has a variable interest. But if you can get a fixed interest, my goodness, refinance anything you can get at a low rate and get it fixed. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and President Biden seems to be learning the opposite lesson that you're learning here, which is he says we've had all this inflation. He's finally admitting it's not transitory. And he says, so the solution is to pass my multi-trillion-dollar spending bill. He's arguing that spending trillions more will reduce inflation. What do you make of that?
That Biden has no idea what causes inflation. Someone should ask him that question. How does spending more money reduce inflation? How does borrowing more money reduce inflation? So I don't know anybody that would believe that. It does amaze me that he says he has 17 Nobel Prize winning economists who say that passing their bill will somehow reduce inflation. That's some mental gymnastics. It's hard for me to comprehend.
Yeah, they would say because it's increasing productivity, but what do you think of the spending that's in that bill? Is it actually increasing productivity in any meaningful way?
I think productivity comes from ingenuity and market efficiencies, but I don't think in any way productivity is increased by government spending. In fact, you could probably argue the opposite. So if you had $1 million and you wanted to let your representatives decide how to spend it, or a bunch of venture capitalists who look at profit and loss and look at markets and make estimates, neither are perfect. It's all a guess of the future. But my thinking is that when it comes to government, it's politicized, and actually, they're talking about adding in other things like what is its benefit to global warming or to climate change? What are the benefits that come from, societal or charitable reasons as opposed to profit and loss? Whereas the investors will only look at profit and loss because their job is pretty much narrowly focused towards trying to invest in things that make money. So the marketplace is always wiser and smarter than government. And in fact, the other reason government's not very good is sort of what Milton Friedman used to say, and that is that nobody spends somebody else's money as wisely as their own. And that truism will always mean that government lacks efficiency and lacks really the drive to make the best decisions for investing. So I would say productivity and the productivity of the capital, whether the capital produces more income, has to always be less with government. The only reason we tolerate government is there are a few things that we say that maybe can't be done in the private sector, but they should be very, very few and far between.
So Biden is not going to get it anytime soon, unfortunately. But what can you and your colleagues in the Senate do? Because people are hurting with energy prices and other things. What could your colleagues come together and do to actually get some of this under control?
Even though we don't have the votes to pass anything, there's still a battle of ideas, and there's moral outrage. So, for example, as I've traveled around Kentucky recently, one of the things people are outraged are that we would give $450,000 to families who broke into the country because they were separated. We're going to give them some sort of payout. People are outraged by that. That outrage is transmitted to legislators. And actually, some on the other side, I think, will probably see the danger of doing this for political reasons. Same way with having the government sift through your bank accounts. If you have $600 or more going through, even changing that to $10,000 still would mean almost everybody's bank account in the country would be sifted through by government trying to squeeze out and examine all your transactions. Once again, enough outrage that it may well be pulled from the bill. You're seeing that the couple of the senators on the Democrat side who may be influenceable, for example, Joe Manchin, he's talking about inflation now and his worry that should we spend so much more. So he's taking more the understanding of inflation that I'm talking about and less what Biden's saying. And he thinks it will be worse with all of this spending. So these are the battles. It's a battle of ideas, and we have to keep talking about it. And even though we don't have the numbers to win politically in Congress, the argument makes a difference. And the idea is, people want a quick fix. They want to win politically, and we can't win politically until there's another election. And I think what happened, in Virginia and New Jersey is an example that there is a wave of discontent over these policies. Once again, the Democrats get exactly the opposite conclusion. They say, oh, they just want us to pass our big government socialism quicker. But I think the message is clear, and in private, they probably understand that this Virginia and New Jersey was a rebuke to Biden's policies.
All right, Senator Paul, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.